Good afternoon, everyone. So a very warm virtual welcome to you all from, I suppose, looking out, it's a bit bleak down the southeast today, but generally it's always sunny down this direction. So I hope everyone is keeping well in these very strange times. A very warm welcome to our presenter today, Professor Annraoi de Paor, and our Southeast Region Committee's Michael Sweetman, who is chairing today's webinar. So my name is Colm Callery. I'm chair of the Southeast Region Committee. And on behalf of the Southeast Region, I'm delighted to welcome you today to our webinar, The Life and Work of Brother Potamian, Irish scientist and X-ray pioneer. Also, I'd like to give a very warm welcome to all of the non-engineers who've joined us today. And we're absolutely delighted that you'll be able to join us for a presentation, which is very much of interest to us all, really. Be you an engineer, a scientist, physicist, medical professionals, and I know there's a few historians in the group as well. So before we kick off, I hand you over to Michael and Professor Annraoi, just a little background on our webinar series. So we, as a committee, had a request by the incoming President of Engineers Ireland, Maurice Buckley, earlier this summer for sectoral projects in support of national recovery. So our Southeast Region Committee's response to this is our webinar series, which we've been running every 3 weeks, and we're going to run up until the end of April, May next year. So our webinar series is a free CPD series. It's open to all, aiming to promote the positive impact that engineers in our region have in our everyday lives across a range of engineering disciplines and areas of expertise. So today's webinar is the 5th in the series. So we kicked off back in September with an overview of the North Keys by Michael Welsh, CEO of Waterford City and County Council. So this project was back in the headlines in the last few weeks with funding of 110 million confirmed in what will be an absolutely amazing boost for the Southeast. So we followed this up with launching B2B projects quickly by Jason O'Concour. And Jason was the first head of engineering of WIT. Then we had Danone and Wexford, and they gave us a presentation on their journey towards carbon neutrality at their award-winning plant in Wexford town. So then our last presentation was an amazing presentation, really. It was by Conor O'Neill of Waveform, and that was on the development of the COVID tracker app. So this is an incredible story of successful collaboration of multiple bodies to deliver the life-saving app. So no doubt most of us have it on our phones. So initially they'd expected maybe 100,000 people to register and use the app, but within 24 hours they had over 1 million people signed up for the app, so absolutely amazing. And such is the success of the app that New York State, when choosing an app for their track and trace, decided to head to Waveform down in Little Old Tramore rather than going to Silicon Valley. So it's amazing stuff, and it just goes to show the level of scientific and engineering talent that we have in this little country of ours. And also that Conor O'Neill of Waveform, who presented to us that day, was a past student of Professor Annraoi in UCD, so it's a very small world. So already we've had nearly 300 attendees for our webinars, and this is an amazing response, and it shows the sign of changing times as we adapt to the new norm of online learning and communication. So once again, on behalf of the Southeast Region members, very warm welcome to Annraoi, and I'd like to give our sincere thanks to you, Annraoi, for presenting to us today, being so generous with your time. I know you're a very proud Waterford native, and I wish you the very best in the hurling this Sunday. And we're all looking forward to it. Yeah, very important, so great to see you win, But we're very much looking forward to the story of Brother Potamian today. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to my colleague on the Southeast Region Committee, Michael Sweetman. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin, for that excellent introduction. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar on the life and work of Brother Potamian, Irish scientist and X-ray pioneer. I'll briefly introduce Professor de Paor to you, and then Professor de Paor will spend around 40-45 minutes to lecture, and then we'll have around 10 or 15 minutes for questions and answers. Professor de Paor was born in Waterford in 1940. He did his BE in electrical engineering, his PhD and his doctorate in science from UCD and the NUI, and he received his MSc in electrical engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. Professor de Paor started his career as an engineer with Radio Ireland at home, then joined the University of Salford and was appointed lecturer there. Then he was appointed Professor of Control Engineering, University of Salford, and then became Professor of Electrical Engineering, UCD in '78, and held that position until his retirement in 2005. I was privileged to have Professor de Paor supervise my BE final year project many years ago, and it was a privilege to work with him. Professor de Paor continues to do research and publish learning papers with former colleagues, fellow of the IEI, fellow of the Institute of Engineering and Technology, and a fellow of the Institute of Mathematics Applications, and is also a member of the Royal Irish Academy. 2005 to 2015, Professor de Paor was director of the Irish Language Summer School, held every August in the Ringgaeltach in his native county Waterford. Finally, Professor de Paor was awarded the Engineers Ireland Southeast Regional Millennium Award for his contributions to engineering. And obviously, we in the Southeast are very proud of the contribution that Professor de Paor has made to engineering. And the other things to note is he was probably the first ever biomedical engineering pioneer in Ireland back in the 80s, where he was bringing together engineering from different disciplines in pursuit of applications that solve unmet medical needs. I'll hand you over now to Professor de Paor.
Thank you very much, Michael. That's very kind of you. So we'll get on with it. As Michael said, I'm an old Waterford man. My goodness. Yes, so long ago. So here we are, Brother Potamian and one fine day in Waterford. Now you'll be wondering who Brother Potamian was. So here we go. Gosh, how do we go, Michael? Oh, there we go. Sorry, we had a problem there. Can you get rid of that thing? Oh, there. Here's a chronology of Brother Potamian's life. He was Michael Francis O'Reilly, born in Ballyborough on September the 25th, 1846. But a few years later, in fact, the very next year, his parents, fleeing the famine, took him to New York. And he lived there until 1859, when he was 13 years old. And in that year, he entered the novitiate of the De La Salle brothers. And he spent his novitiate years in Montreal and Quebec. And then he spent a year teaching in St. Louis, Missouri. And then he spent 23 years in London. And while he was in London, he did the degrees of BSc, MSc, and DSc from the University of London. And then 3 glorious years in Waterford, 1893 to 1896. And unfortunately, he was transferred then to Manhattan. I'll explain later why that happened. And he spent the rest of his career in Manhattan, apart from 1 year sabbatical in Nantes in France. And he died on the 20th of January, 1917 in St. Lawrence Hospital, New York. His death was very unexpected. He expected, it was a minor illness, and he expected to get out of hospital. Anyway, here's a replica of an Irish famine ship, the Jeannie Johnson. Brother Potamian and his family would have gone to America in a ship like this. I was on that once in Waterford. Now, when he was in England, he began to do scientific research. And as far as I can discover, his very first scientific paper was on the Gram machine, or the new electric light on the clock tower, Westminster. This is the Gram machine, and I have a little electrical alphabet which I give to some of my students, or I used to. And Z is for zest of armature, sing Zenobi Theophily Gram and his ring, the Gram ring armature. So we'll go on now. Here's St. Joseph's College, Tooting, where he spent 23 years. And when he got his DSc, his students at Tooting presented him with these marvelous robes. And he said to them, "You may not see me again arrayed in these gorgeous robes, for I possess one beneath them, far more precious to me, and one that no university can confer, the humble garb of our brother of the Christian school." That's the De La Salle brothers. So here's something in St. Joseph's College in Tooting. They have a house called Potamian House. And I saw this little extract in a 1947 article that was sent to me by the Brothers Archives in Rome. And his students in St. Joseph's College, Tooting, knew him as Dr. Potts. So Potts Pottest, Potts can do. He could do everything. So the first time I ever came across him was in 1978 when I was doing research on the history of electrical illumination. And the first thing I read by M.F. O'Reilly, as he was then, was this paper on the voltaic arc and inventions by Z.T. Graham in volume 1 of Electrical Illumination, edited by James Dredge. And the funny thing is, on the paper that I printed out from that, I actually wrote in a corner, Brother Potamian. I somehow knew that M.F. O'Reilly was Brother Potamian, although I'm not sure how. And then in volume 2 of Electrical Illumination, edited by Dredge, he wrote a lovely chapter on electrical measurement. And this, as I'll tell you later, was actually the subject of his DSc thesis. So there we are. Now, here's his signature for you. I found his signature in the library in Manhattan College, where he ended his career. And it was a signature on the typescript of his 1885 chapter for volume 2 of James Dredge's 2 books. So Brother Potamian, there's his signature, London, 1885. Now, after his years in London, he was transferred to Waterford, a great place to be. But unfortunately, he was only there for 3 years. And I discovered a book about him, Brother Potamian, Educator and Scientist by Battersby, published by Burns Oates in '53. And one of his former Waterford students, James Ahern, remembered him in the following way. He says, I remember Brother Potamian very well. He was the first man of genius I had ever met. He impressed me enormously, and this impression grew as I became better acquainted with him. He charmed us, he inspired us with a desire for higher things, he broadened our horizon, and he became our idol throughout our lives. His lectures on magnetism and electricity were so clear, simple, and precise that a child could follow them. Imagine that. They bore the stamp of genius. He dictated the points of his lectures, which made it easier for us to follow. He used the simplest language, and it was the first time I realized how ordinary, simple words could be molded into rich, musically artistic sentences. Imagine that. I wish all of us lecturing could get that. Here's something from his notes. He's deriving a famous little equation in electrical engineering, the Biot-Savart law. He's using the Biot-Savart law to derive Ampere's circuital theorem, but I'm sure you're not interested in that. And here's one of his notes deriving some moments of inertia when he was teaching mechanics to his students. Now, here's a famous experiment he did in Waterford in February and March 1895. And I've read in Waterford papers that this attracted great attention by the citizens of Waterford. It was an experiment by Jean-Léon Foucault. If you suspend a pendulum, which is free to vibrate in any direction, over a circular plate and let it go, what you'll find is, as the Earth rotates under the pendulum, the plane of rotation of the pendulum appears to change. So, and it'll appear to rotate at an angular velocity, which is the angular velocity there by the sine of the latitude. And Brother Potamian was able to demonstrate to the people of Waterford in 1895 that the Earth rotated. And in fact, he was able with them to try to calculate the latitude of Waterford, which is 52.53, I think, something like that. Anyway, while he was in Waterford, he read a paper in a journal called The Electrician about the discovery of X-rays. And X-rays were discovered and named on November the 8th, 1895 in Würzburg by Willem Conrad Romkin. And of course, they were known as Romkin rays for a long time, but he himself knew them as X-rays. And he got the first Nobel Prize for Physics in 1901 for this discovery. And here's, I found it here, a translation of Romkin's paper as read by Brother Potamian in the Electrician in January 1896. He's just describing how if the discharge of great Ruhmkorff coil be passed through a hit-or vacuum tube, then the tube being covered with a close layer of thin black pasteboard and the room darkened, a paper screen covered on one side with barium platinum cyanide and brought near the apparatus will be seen to glow brightly and fluoresce at each discharge, even when the screen is moved 2 meters from the apparatus. Photographic plates are sensitive to X-rays. It thus becomes possible to fix many phenomena. I have, for example, photographs of the shadow of hand bones, of the shadow of a wooden spool wound with wire, of a set of weights in a box, of a compass in which the magnetic needle is quite enclosed in metal, and of a piece of metal which is shown to lack homogeneity by the use of X-rays. So that's what Brother Potamian read in the Electrician in January 1896. Now, 2 things about that. The induction coil wasn't in fact invented by Ruhmkorff at all. It was invented by the Reverend Professor Nicholas Callan at Mcnamee. And there's a picture of Callan's coil, which I got from the Scientific Museum at the University of Mcnamee. And also the automatic interrupter to give a periodic current in the primary, generating a continuous train of impulses across the secondary, was also an Irish invention by James William Macaulay of Dublin, lived from 1806 to 1867. And there's some waveforms from the induction coil fed by Macaulay's interrupter. And you can see in the lower trace, you can see the positive spike. And these are the ones which generate the X-rays. There's, on the left there, we have the focus tube, as it was called, an X-ray focus tube invented by Herbert Jackson in March 1896. Now you can see how up-to-date Brother Potamian was, because his X-ray photograph was taken in April 1896, and the X-ray focus tube had only been invented the previous month at King's College London. He obviously knew Herbert Jackson from his years in London. So there we are. Now here's Brother Potamian remembering the great event. And I had 2 sketches of Waterford there. And here we go. The first experimenters had to find out for themselves everything relating to the sensitive plate and its development, as well as to the distance of the X-ray tube and the time of exposure. This was the writer's experience when, scarcely 3 months after publication of the paper in the London Electrician, he was urged by a physician of Waterford, Ireland, to overcome personal reluctance and contribute to the relief of suffering humanity by using the apparatus of the De La Salle Training College to locate a splinter of steel which some time before had found itself unnoticed into the hand of his patient. In the presence of all the physicians of the city who came unbidden to see the novel experiment, the radiograph was taken on April 13, 1896, with a 6-inch spark coil, a small focus tube, and a wet plate. The exposure given was 1 minute. When the plate was developed, the splinter was distinctly seen, and needless to say, it was promptly removed. So that's Brother Potamian remembering the wonderful day. Now, that's the fine day in Waterford, one fine day in Waterford, April 13th, 1896. And April the 13th is a famous day in Irish history because I discovered that on April the 13th, 1742, the world premiere of Handel's Messiah was given in Dublin. And the physician of Waterford City, I was able to discover who he was in old Waterford newspapers. His name was Dr. Ringrose Atkins. But there we are. And Brother Potamian described this, what I just read to you is an extract from his very last paper, which he wrote on the coming of age of the X-ray. And sadly, when that paper was published, he had actually died 2 months beforehand. Here's X-ray equipment from 1900, but as Brother Potamian just said, he had to do it all himself. That's a set of superior X-ray apparatus which you could have bought for £7, 10 shillings in the year 1900. And here's Brother Potamian's X-ray. Unfortunately, his original X-ray photograph, his plate, has been lost. It was kept in the De La Salle College in Waterford until the 1950s, and then it was sent to an exhibition in America, and sadly it was lost there and never came back. But fortunately, they kept a print of the picture, and I came across it in the Irish Medical Journal in 1985 by a paper by J.P. Murray. So, and you can see there, I've put a red arrow pointing to it. You can just about see the splinter of steel embedded in the hand of the lady. You can see the lady's rings. And in my electrical alphabet, I say R is for romkins, raised penetrations, let surgeons correctly cite planned operations. Now, the Kelvin connection, just a minute. Brother Potamian was a Kelvin man. He was from Baileyborough. And Willem Ronken, professor of physics in Würzburg, discovered X-rays at the end of 1895, as we know. But did you know that the patron saint of Würzburg is a Kelvin man from Mulla? He was St. Kilian, who was martyred in Würzburg in 689 AD. And there's a statue of St. Kilian on a bridge over the River Mine. I was able to find that picture in Würzburg. Now, question is, where did he and his students go to celebrate the great event? Well, I discovered that he took the Waterford and Tramore Railway and went to Tramore. And the train didn't run through the sleepers, the buffers. This happened on 4th of August 1947, the day before my 7th birthday. But I'll tell you about it. He went to Waterford, he went to Tramore, and I think that might be me, I'm not sure. It looks very like me when I was that age. But anyway, Brother Potamian, he came to the students and he said, one day after he'd been to the beach at Tramore for a couple of hours, he prefaced his evening lecture by the remark, read Evangeline. I went to the beach at Tramore today to depolarize my brain, and walking the beach, I read Evangeline perhaps for the 20th time and found it still as fresh as ever. Even while enjoying the sea breeze and the music of the waves, he could not vegetate or laze, as the moderns say. That was from Jason O'Reilly in 1944. Now, Evangeline is a very sad, epic poem by H.W. Longfellow. And I'd recommend that you'll find it on the internet, and you'll find the story of Evangeline, a very sad story dealing with the expulsion of the French Canadians, the Acadians from Nova Scotia, I think it was in 1847. And anyway, when I was in my lab, I asked my students one day, when they went to Brother Potamian and his students, when they went to Tramore, who did they meet? And one of my students, Catherine Halpin, told me they met the young Ludwig von Drake, who was a future professor. So there's Catherine's picture of Ludwig von Drake in Paor. Now, enter Guglielmo Marconi, who was Irish-Italian, Italian-Irish, Italian father, Irish mother, and he shared the Nobel Prize for Physics with C.F. Brown, a German, in 1909. And of course, we all know him as the great pioneer of radio communication. And the question is, in what way did Brother Potamian work with him? Well, this tells it all. Another Waterford student, Brother James, remembers. On his next appearance among us, he prefaced his first lecture with the following almost prophetic remark: "I have a great announcement to make to you. Since I last had the pleasure of seeing you, a young man and myself have succeeded in sending a wireless message across a room. All that's now necessary is to put up machinery powerful enough to send wireless messages around the earth. And I have no doubt that most of you who are now listening to me will live to see the day when you'll be able to sit by your fireside and listen to speeches and concerts from London and elsewhere. And some of you perhaps may live to see the day when not only can you listen to speakers in distant parts, but actually see them on the screen. Isn't that a wonderful prophecy of television?" And the young man, of course, was Marconi. And Marconi later was invited to a banquet in New York after he won the Nobel Prize. And the organizer of the banquet, Mr. John Mcnamee of Brooklyn, remembers a conversation with Marconi. Mr. Mcnamee asked Mr. Marconi if there was any favor or request he would like done for the dinner. And the answer of Marconi was, "Yes, I'd very much like to be seated at my right, the man to whom I owe a great debt of gratitude because of his solving the problems of induction for me. This man is in Manhattan College, and his laboratory is small, where tin cans, wire nails, and iron filings make up a good part of his experimental equipment." Isn't that wonderful? He is Michael F. O'Reilly, known in religion as Brother Potamian. And so it happened to Brother Potamian's intense embarrassment, because Brother Potamian wished to be seated in obscurity with Manhattan alumnus Raymond P. Sullivan, who later became Mr. Mcnamee's son-in-law. So that was it. And here's some extracts from Brother Potamian's notes, and I'll show you something. He speaks about Marconi, and he said Marconi was born near Bologna on April the 25th, 1874. His mother, English ? He didn't know at the time that his mother was actually Irish. He speaks English fluently and with a good accent. From the age of 14, he was keenly interested in electricity. And of course, you all know the main person who promoted Marconi and gave him all the courage to approach the world was his mother. She was a great woman. Now, after only 3 years in Waterford, Potamian was sent to Manhattan College in New York, where he became Professor of Physics and Dean of Engineering for the rest of his life, apart from that 1 year sabbatical in France. And here's the background to Brother Potamian's transfer to Manhattan. Besides the School of Arts and Sciences, there was now a School of Engineering, a more recent creation due to the initiative of Brother Potamian. This remarkable man, after studying engineering at Queen's College, Cork, and graduating from Trinity College, Dublin, had been Professor of Road and Railway Engineering at McGill University, Montreal. He had subsequently been employed as an official surveyor by the Canadian government and later became chief engineer with the Missouri Pacific Railroad. It was only after long practical experience at the age of 50 that he eventually entered the Institute of the Brothers. He had hardly laid the foundations of the School of Engineering at Manhattan when he died. Brother Potamian inherited the legacy. So he was sent to replace Brother Paulian, Mark Hamilton, born in Tarbert in County Kerry. There we are. Here's Manhattan College in the second half of the 19th century. So that's what it would have been like when Brother Potamian went there. You see that lovely little steam train in the foreground. There we are. Now, here's a little thing I came across from Jason Riley as well. Anonymous article, Marconi's Irish colleague in the Irish Echo, a New York paper, in 1892, it stated, Brother Potamian was the first to demonstrate the principle of the thermionic valve in America many years before such workers as Leda Forrest and others discovered it. Yet most of the histories of science seem to have missed all mention of Brother Potamian in this respect. So, the thermionic valve. Now, Brother Potamian, along with one of his colleagues, Brother Arnold, published a famous book in 1904, published by McGraw-Hill, and I was lucky enough to get it. The Epistola of Petrus Peregrinus de Maricourt, the Sigillus of Foucault, concerning the magnet, finished at the siege of Lucera in 1269. Just imagine this, Petrus Peregrinus, he was actually a member of an army besieging a city in Italy, and yet he had time to write a letter on the magnet. And Brother Potamian mentioned, they're on the screen there, Peregrinus was the first to assign a definite position to the poles of the lodestone, but magnetism was then. He proved that unlike poles attract each other and similar ones repel, every fragment of a magnet, however small, is a complete magnet. A pole of a magnet may neutralize a weaker one of the same name and even reverse its polarity. He was the first to pivot a magnetized needle and surround it with a graduated cylinder. He determined the position of an object by its magnetic bearing as done today in compass surveying. And he introduced he thought he had invented a perpetual motion machine. He introduced into it the idea of a magnetic motor, a clever idea indeed for a 13th century engineer. So those words are all Brother Potamian. Now, Brother Potamian in 1909 published a famous book with James J. Walsh, and it was published by Fordham University Press, Makers of Electricity. And Brother Potamian wrote the chapters on Peregrinus and Columbus, Norman and Gilbert, Franklin and some contemporaries, Hans Christian Ørsted, and Lord Kelvin. The rest of the chapters were written by Walsh. Here's a little extract from his chapter on Norman's illustration of dip. Up until Norman's time, the compass needle was normally pivoted in a horizontal plane, but Norman floated one in water, buoyed up by a piece of wood, and he discovered that it turned around and took up a position which he called the magnetic dip. And in London at the time when he did it, it was an angle of 71 degrees to the vertical. So, a picture of a parish priest, Procopius Divish, Prenditz in Moravia, and this shows the trouble that pioneers can get into. He erected in an open space a lightning conductor, 130 feet in height, the weird-looking structure designed to ward off lightning of heaven, had no less than 325 well-distributed points. It happened in the second year that the summer was unusually dry, in consequence of which the crops failed almost completely. It prevented a lightning strike, he said. That might be, but they did not see the prevention. What they did see and keenly realize was the failure of their crops. And on an appointed day, a band of bellicose farmers came down on the village and wrecked the apparatus, which had cost the priest so much thought and manual labor, and on which knowingly and justly he relied for the protection of the homesteads of his rustic flock. So that's poor Father Prokofius Divish in what's now the Czech Republic. And here's Hans Christian Ørsted, Brother Potamian, describing this wonderful experiment by Ørsted, when Ørsted discovered the magnetic effect of the electric current. He stretched the wire over and parallel to the compass needle, and to his intense delight, the magnet turned aside as soon as the circuit was closed. The result was pronounced and instantaneous, and the discovery was destined to revolutionize existing modes of transmitting intelligence to distant parts and bringing remotest countries into direct and immediate relation with one another. So that's Brother Potamian describing that famous experiment by Hans Christian Ørsted. Now, I came across a book called The Schools and Scholars of Breffni by Philip O'Connell, published in 1942. And this has a chapter on Brother Potamian. And it mentions that he was a personal friend and admirer of Lord Kelvin, the Belfast-born scientist, whose lectures he attended in London and under whose expert guidance and direction his earlier studies in electrical science and mathematical physics were pursued. And as I mentioned, I think Lord Kelvin inspired his DSc thesis. Many years later, Brother Potamian wrote, I heard Lord Kelvin, the Royal Institution, London, on some of his favourite dynamical subjects, such as the gyrostat, vortex rings, and the like. However impressed by his keen eye, intellectual forehead, his mastery of the subject, and wealth of illustration, I was no less impressed by his vivacity, his enthusiasm, and the rapidity with which he could leave a train of thought and return to it again. There's Lord Kelvin, one of the most famous Irish-born scientists of all time. And Lord Kelvin, his first appearance in public was laying the transatlantic cable. There's Brother Potamian describing it. After a series of disappointing mishaps, the Agamemnon landed the shore end safely in Valentia, in County Kerry, and the Niagara landed hers in Trinity Bay on the morning of August the 5th, 1858, on which historic date the telegraphic union of the two worlds was finally consummated and the great feat of the century accomplished. And as Brother Potamian mentions, Professor William Thomson was chief electrical engineer for the project and was knighted for it. And then he says, it was things that the man who was considered the greatest since Newton should be buried in Westminster Abbey, and that the mortal remains of Lord Kelvin should find a resting place next to the grave of the genius who thought out the Principia and discovered the gravitational law which governs the planetary as well as the stellar universe. His, for Kelvin, in Permo, a hero, this second law holds down to absolute zero, the second law of thermodynamics. And there's historic date, August the 5th, 1858. So of course, August the 5th is also my own birthday. Here's an article by Brother Potamian, the 250th anniversary of the discovery of gravitation. He describes Isaac Newton, the summer of 1666, 250 years ago. a young man of 23, a Cambridge graduate with 1 year standing, while sitting in the garden of his Woolsthorpe farm, alone and absorbed in thought, saw an apple fall to the ground. It is gravity that causes it to fall. Might not this same gravity extend out into space and bend the path of the moon from a straight line into the orbit which it describes around the Earth? N is for Newton, whose apple-banked cranium enclosed the supremest of brains last millennium. Now, many people consider that Brother Potamian's greatest contribution to historical scholarship was his contribution, virtually the whole thing, to a 2-volume catalogue of the Schuyler-Scott-Wheeler gift to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, which Brother Potamian served as secretary. So this is a masterly analysis of 6,000 very rare publications, many of them in Latin, the result of 7 years' work. It took Brother Potamian 7 years to work through these 6,000 ancient publications and summarize them all. Now this, sorry, just go back to it again if I can. Can I go back just for a second, Michael? Yeah, sorry, just a little thing. I should mention that this Wheeler gift catalog is actually available nowadays on the internet. So if you Google Wheeler gift catalog, you'll find it all. It's absolutely fantastic, and the amount of work Brother Potamian put into it is indescribable. So he also made some contributions to the Catholic Encyclopedia, and I was lucky enough to find this in the Cavan County Museum, the Cavan County Library, and all these contributions he had, potted biographies of these famous pioneers of electricity and magnetism. And Zamboni, that is Zamboni, whose bright pile and bell in Clarendon, Oxford for ages ran well. Well, many years ago, I visited the Clarendon laboratory in Oxford, and I actually saw Zamboni's dry pile and bell ringing still. I don't know if it's still ringing or not, but when I was there, maybe about 20 years ago, it was still ringing. And here's Brother Potamian returning from his year in France, writing to his colleague, Brother Mardalian. He mentions Justin, who was also in Waterford with him. And he mentions the captain, Dr. Potts, the student's captain, himself, Dr. Potts. And here's a few snippets from Brother Potamian's diary, which I got from Marie Flynn, Manhattan College. In 1909, March 24, he demonstrated wireless at a school in New York called St. Bridget's. On April the 15th, 1909, he received from the publishers 12 copies of the Wheeler catalogue. On April 28, 1909, he measured the declination. The declination is the deviation from true north-south, 9 degrees 22 minutes west at 9 p.m. And look at this, the poor fellow. On July the 15th, 1909, he had 5 teeth removed, poor guy. In May 1910, he had a good view at 3:15 a.m. You see, he was always working, of Halley's Comet. And then one of his nieces, or maybe a grandniece even, on Memorial Day made her first communion in 1911. And then he took the train to Philadelphia. And on the way, he read Gulliver's Travels and Holy Orders by Marie Corelli. And on September the 21st, at East Orange in New York State, he met J.P. Holland. Now, John Holland from County Clare was famous as the inventor of the modern submarine. And January 1913, he attended a lecture by Amundsen, the famous Antarctic explorer, at the Carnegie Hall, and also Peary, one of the explorers, was there. And he says about Amundsen, he was the sturdy son of the old Vikings, strong personality, resonant voice. And would you believe it, in those days, he had to pay $4 to attend the lecture. That was an incredible price in those days, 1913. And then a famous thing, in January 1915, one of his colleagues, A. Lockheed, talked over the phone to San Francisco, and that was a marvelous thing at the time. And in June 1915, he went to Villanova College for an SCD degree. Villanova is famous as the college where Ron Delaney and several other famous Irish athletes attended. And then on November 13, 1915, at Pocatino, he saw the Leonids and saw one fireball and 3 shooting stars. And here's a picture of him in later years with a graduating class from Manhattan College. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to find what year that was. So there he is on the left in the front row. And the last words from Brother James, one of his students at Waterford: we, his students, who are now advanced in years, have lost none of our admiration for the noble professor who was such an example and inspiration, and who has influenced us in the orientation of our lives, not only with Brother Potamian and the authority on electricity and magnetism. He was conversant with every branch of science, and also quite a literature, and that in several languages. He had such a thirst for knowledge. He was never idle and was never wasted time. I can assure you that there is no exaggeration in my remarks, Brother Potamian. If anything, they fall short of the truth. He was all that has been said of him and more. I should say he was one of Ireland's greatest sons, a saint and a scholar. Remember when we used to be the island of saints and scholars? And there's Brother Potamian's memorial card, which I got from Mary Hackett in Waterford, the mother of one of my students. And here's, oops, I'll just go back if you can. Oh, sorry, no, it's all right. I thought I could stop that. Coming down, but no, I can't. No, it's coming down, it's all right. There's the main street in Ballyborough, as it was when Brother Potamian was born. And over there on the right, there's a few shops. And one of those shops, which I visited about 20 years ago, is Finnegan's shop. And that was actually his mother's people. His mother was Jennifer Finnegan. And Brother Potamian was actually born above Finnegan's shop in the main street in Ballyborough. So I thank all my students, family and friends for their help. Dermot Zabari and Colin Lawless for the scanning, Catherine Halpin for her Tremor fantasy, Dr. Tomas Ward, who's now a prof in DCU, for playing Vessel. Oh gosh, I didn't play that. And Brian Cogan for sourcing the Wheeler gift catalogue. But as I say, it's now available on the internet. And Claire and Gail Boylan and Sabina Donahue for source material from the Cavan Library. And my son and student Liam de Paor for giving me a copy of Makers of Electricity. And Mary Hackett for Brother Potamian's memorial card. I'm also grateful to Brother Pius McCarthy, Dublin, Brother Edwin and Sister Victoire in Rome, Dr. Anne-Marie Flynn and Brother Luke Sam and Amy Surak in Manhattan, and Peter Costello, the Honorary Librarian of the Catholic Central Library in Dublin. And that's it, my friend. We're back to the finished slide again. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'd like to thank
Right.
Professor de Paor for that great whistle-stop tour of Brother Potamian's life. and some other great famous Irish scientists, I presume.
Yeah,
Lord Kelvin being
yeah,
probably the most famous.
that's right.
I think Professor de Paor continues in a tradition of great Irish engineers and scientists and teachers. Probably my camera not picking up
Oh God.
picture at the moment. Some questions here and some comments from the group. First one is from your son Liam de Paor.
Oh, Liam! Oh my goodness,
A big
Liam!
hi from your son listening to the US. He doubts if you were aware he was going to be able to log in.
I wasn't, Liam. That's wonderful. And I mentioned you at the end, Liam. Remember, you gave me a present of makers of electricity. Mm.
And then hello to Annraoi and Eugene. Sorry, to Annraoi from Eugene and Lucy Muskrat, Oman. Says,
Oh
bravo.
my goodness, Eugene and Lucy. That's marvelous. Eugene Coyle. Eugene is one of my former PhD students. It's wonderful, Eugene. I don't know how you knew I was going to give this talk, but that's wonderful. Lovely to have you listening.
And then the first question here from O'Gill. Did Brother Potamian give credit to Nicholas Callan in his writings? Or is it possible that Brother Potamian wouldn't have been aware of Callan's work?
He wasn't aware of his work, I'm afraid. He didn't give him credit at all. He thought that the induction coil was invented by Ruhmkorff, but in fact it was invented by Father Callan. Yeah, sorry, Owen.
And then there's just a comment from one of the participants. That was excellent. Very many thanks. Though they had a lifelong interest in the history of engineering technology, and De La Salle taught at De La Salle School for 10 years. The person, even though they were in De La Salle, or taught De La Salle for 10 years, knew nothing about Brother Potamian on today. So thanks. There's a comment in our native language. I'll do my best with it. Vi sin an fiaras an Saval Gawa Agus.
Oh, good of Mila Mahagad. K. Curran. Unknown to Shin.
Paddy Gilligan.
Oh, Paddy Gilligan. This good Paddy Shah. Oh, Tashinga Hunta Paddy Shah. Tatsulaganga Buntu Tanavas.
And from Mary McDonough, very interesting lecture. Thanks, Annraoi. We were very lucky to have a display on Brother Potamian in the De La Salle College here in Waterford.
Wonderful. Yes, I hope to get down there sometime and see it, please God. When we're able to travel again, when all this lockdown is over.
They're the questions and the comments that have come in.
All right.
Here's one from Martina Stack. Thank you, Professor de Paor. Martina Stack from the De La Salle Waterford here.
Oh, wonderful.
We have the Xray on display and I look forward to your visit.
Oh, please God, I'll get down there before too long. I'd love to see the Xray machine. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Yeah.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you.
From Ben Hanlon, wonderful talk. Thanks so much. I live in De La Salle and I'm a brother in the college, Brother Ben.
Brother Ben, that's wonderful, Brother Ben. Brother Ben, I started my education with the De La Salle brothers, but sadly, when my father died and my mother took us to Dublin, there was no De La Salle College anywhere near us, so I went to the Irish Christian Brothers, the other side. There we are, yeah. Oh, what
and it's your brother, I understand, Dr. Con Paor, saying that obviously he's hoping to bring you down to Waterford as soon as obviously restrictions are relaxed.
That'll be wonderful. I call my brother Jules, actually. I christened him Jules when we were teenagers. So Jules, I'd love to go down to Waterford, but that'd be absolutely marvellous. Thank you.
And David Rouse, he says he's no engineering background, but was absolutely wonderful and really weakest.
Fault your own, David.
Basil Dillon Malone. Wonderful presentation, Dr. Annraoi from Basil Dillon Malone in Syracuse, New York.
That's wonderful, Basil. I'm delighted you got it. And I hope that your old classmates from the class of 68. I taught Basil many, many years ago. So that's great, Basil. I'm glad you got it. All the best. God bless. Bye.
Thanks for that lovely feedback from all the
wonderful
questions.
Wonderful.
Here's another question here. Thanks, Annraoi, for your insightful lecture. Ger Hurley in UCG here. Doing some research on the mercury arc valve invented in New York in 1902. Probably a connection to Brother Potamian, and he must follow up with you.
Yes, indeed. We'll try and follow that up, yes.
Raymond Burke, they're just saying we're all watching.
Oh, Ray, lovely Ray. I'm delighted you're watching, Ray. Raymond was one of my students many years ago, and his two sons were also my students, Dave and Darren. And Dave did his 3 degrees under me.
Oh,
His bachelor's, his master's, and his PhD.
congratulations.
Yeah. Right, Ray. It's wonderful that you could log in, Ray.
And for your brother, he's always happy to answer to Jules and great.
Yeah. Right, Jules. Oh gosh. So anything else?
I think that's everything. And my own late father, I understand, I think one of the first places he ever superintended the exams was in LSL in Waterford.
Is that right? Oh
but
my goodness.
may not have been aware of Brother Potamian at the time
No,
of that.
no.
Probably Irish scientists maybe haven't got the recognition that they deserve
They haven't.
in our history.
No, indeed they haven't. No.
Angela Collins, excellent presentation, thank you. He's married to a physics lecturer in WIT, and our dinner conversation will be very interesting this evening.
Oh, wonderful.
Smiley face.
Yeah.
And from Peter O'Loughlin, many thanks. Very interesting and informative talk.
You're very welcome, Peter. It was a pleasure.
So it's probably nearly all of the questions that I'm seeing coming up. We're probably getting close to
it's a lot of time.
Apologies for my camera not showing myself up in the dark, but on behalf of the Southeastern region, I'd like to thank Professor for the lecture, and I'll just hand you back to Colin just to close out.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yes. Professor Henry, fantastic. That was a fantastic story and so well told. And it's so heartening to see that members of your family joined in as well, that Brother Jules and your son Liam all the way from New York. So
that's right,
for
isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Yeah. So our webinar series, we're delighted because they're our first international guests. You know, now we can say that we've people joined from America, from New York, and also Muscat, Oman, you know, so it's...
That's right, Muscat, Oman, Eugene and his wife, Judy.
Yeah, and even, I was never aware, I live in Rosslare, and there's a place in Rosslare called Marconi House, and I never actually realised that Marconi had won the Nobel Prize, you know, so...
That's right, 1909. And of course he did a lot of his work in in Ireland. His mother was Irish, Annie Jamison, one of the whiskey family.
Yeah, so the house is still there, standing, you know, so it's a great bit of history.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, thanks a million for your presentation. So, thanks again to Sinead Quinn Phillips. Yeah, so who set up everything today, and thanks again to both Michael and Owen Gill, who did amazing work and kind of pulling everything together and getting so many invites out as well, you know, so we're absolutely thrilled with that. So our next webinar, the next in our series is going to be in the new, so Day On, and they'll give us an insight into biometric technology. So that should be a fascinating lecture. So that event is on Wednesday, the 13th of January at 4 p.m. So again, like we've some fantastic content in the rest of our webinar series running all the way up to May. So delighted if everyone could join us again. And as per today, it's an open invite. So, so thanks everyone for attendance. Professor Henry, thanks. It was an absolute pleasure to hear you. Yep. And